City, Neighborhood Services, Veteran and Military Affairs. I am joined by my colleague, City Councilor Matt O'Malley. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing. It is being recorded and broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, webcast boston.gov/citycouncil/TV. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We will also take public testimony, and we would appreciate it if you could sign in to testify. At the start of your testimony, please state your name, affiliation, and neighborhood. Today's docket is 1553. This matter is sponsored by the mayor and referred to this committee, City Neighborhood Services, Veteran and Military Affairs, on 11-6-2019. Docket 1553. Message in order approving approximately $692,208 from the Browne Fund for projects described in the attached order that I will soon read. The Browne Fund Commissioners met on October 23rd, 2019, and voted to approve these projects. It is my belief that the commissions that these projects will help our city's streets, ways, squares, and parks, as Mr. Browne directed in his will in the year of 1892. At this time, I would like to ask City Councilor Matt O'Malley if he would like to give an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, looking forward to supporting, I think, some wonderful, really important historical and projects that promote openness, and look forward to continuing in honoring the great legacy of Mr. Browne and supporting these great initiatives in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And for the record, I will just give a quick highlight of the potential awards. Boston Foundation, celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, located on the Boston Common. The Coconut Grove Memorial Committee at the vicinity of Stoutlet Park. The Brighton Gateway Improvement Committee, the Friends of the Public Garden, the Old West Church, the Southwest Corridor, the Friends of Haley Fields in Roslindale, the Holocaust Memorial across the street from City Hall, in the Massachusetts Fallen Heroes Memorial in the South Boston waterfront area. At this time, I would like to say thank you to Mayor Walsh and the mayor's staff as well for their work on this important program. I'd also like to ask that those that are here as part of the panel, if you could please state your name, your department, and maybe an opening statement as well.
Great. Thank you very much, councilors, for having us. My name is Drew Smith. I'm head of Treasury for the City of Boston, also in that capacity over the Trust Division. I'm joined by my colleagues Richard DiPiano, the Second Assistant Collector Treasurer, and Margaret Dyson, our new Trust Manager, who I know has already been in front of the council already once in about the last 3 weeks. So thrilled to be here. As you're aware, the Browne Fund is one of the many funds held in trust by the City of Boston and administered by the city's Treasury Department. While each trust is unique, varying not only by purpose but also by size, the Browne Fund is large enough that it is able on its own to generate significant annual sums for the purpose of creating and supporting statues, fountains, and monuments to ornament the city's streets, ways, squares, and parks, as you'd mentioned, as Mr. Browne's will charged. Earlier this year, as is required by the trust and has become a standard process, an evaluation committee met and considered funding requests put forward by local nonprofits and community-based organizations. Based on those requests, recommendations were made by the committee to the Browne Fund Commission. That commission consisting of the mayor, the CFO, and the City Council's longest-serving member. Those recommendations were considered with final funding decisions as provided in this appropriation order, which requests, as you'd mentioned, appropriation of $692,208 in support of 9 projects. Treasury is pleased to play a role in the administration of the Browne Fund, a trust that contributes greatly to the character of the city through the funding of projects that honor our heroes, that support neighborhood efforts and that bring our community together towards shared goals. I'd now like to provide a very brief summary of each of the projects and the request. Please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any specific questions, or feel free to save them to the end. The first item is to the Boston Foundation for Design Services of a sculpture celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King to be located in the Boston Common in the amount of $100,000. To the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee for Design Collaboration of an artist and landscape architect to develop a design proposal commemorating the Coconut Grove Fire that occurred on November 18, 1942, to be located in the vicinity of Statler Park in an amount of $30,000. To the Brighton Gateway Improvement Committee for the reconstruction of green space on Commonwealth Ave and Father Hurley Way in Brighton in the amount of $100,000. To the Friends of the Public Garden for the creation of new lighting for the Samuel Morrison sculpture on Commonwealth Ave Mall in Back Bay in the amount of $25,000. To the Old West Church for the redesign and reconstruction of the green space area surrounding Old West Church in the amount of $100,000. To the Southwest Corridor Park Conservancy for hardscape improvements, including the rehabilitation of an iron dry fountain and related paving in the amount of $20,000. To the Friends of Healyfield for the fabrication and installation of an ornamental fence and gateway at the Healyfield Community Garden in Roslindale in the amount of $33,000 or $33,060. To the Holocaust Memorial Committee for upgrades and landscape improvements to the Holocaust Memorial in the amount of $186,148. And finally, to the Massachusetts Fallen Heroes Memorial for the upgrade and artistic improvements to the Massachusetts Fallen Heroes Memorial located at the Seaport District on Northern Ave in the amount of $98,000. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you. For the first one, the Boston Foundation in support of the Dr. Martin Luther King, Coretta Scott King, to be located on the Boston Common, can you give a little bit of background on the status of that project?
Sure. It's in design development at the moment. It needs to complete its design development documents and go through the permitting process with the various commissions that have jurisdiction. So this will help support them and get them to construction documents.
Thank you, Margaret. The Coconut Grove Memorial Committee to be located in the Statler Park. Can you give a description of how that funds will be used?
It will be used to create a request for proposals from a team that includes an artist and a landscape architect to develop with the committee and the community a suitable memorial for those who were lost at the Coconut Grove Fire.
Yeah, I think that will be a great project. It'll provide so much invaluable information, a place for learning, a place for healing, but also a place to recognize the loss of life during that terrible event. But also it's a way for, I know it's a way for our fire departments across the country to learn from our past as well. So I think that's going to be a tremendous project. The Brighton Gateway Improvement Committee, can you give a little bit of background on that project?
This has been a very active community group. They're working in partnership with Boston College and with the Department of Conservation and Recreation to improve that entrance to Boston right at Commonwealth Avenue. It is not a distinguished entrance to our great city at the moment, but they're working, we supported a redesign through the Browne Fund Committee, and they're beginning implementation with these funds.
Okay. The Public Garden project in the Back Bay?
The Back Bay project will involve lighting the Samuel Morrison statue along Commonwealth Avenue Mall. Morrison is the gentleman sitting on the great big rock.
Yep.
This has been through the Landmarks Commission and is done with the Friends of the Public Garden, which also works on Commonwealth Avenue Mall. It's the only lighting, the statue lighting is the only year-round lighting in the Commonwealth Avenue Mall, so it's a tremendous benefit to the community as well.
I have the opportunity to work with the Friends of the Public Garden and they do excellent work, not only in the public garden, but also on the Boston Common. So I know that'll be another great project. A little bit of background information on the Old West Church project.
Old West Church is a really fascinating proposal to create a community garden and food forest on the property of Old West Church and improve accessibility for people with mobility constraints at the same time. Terrific team, has done a lot of fundraising, and was a very impressive proposal.
Can you, for those that may not know, can you give a description of where the Old West Church is located?
On Charles Street, near, how do I describe where Old West Church is? In Bowdoin, Charles and Bowdoin Streets.
Okay, thank you. And so that money will be used as part of ADA compliance issues?
In addition to creating this community garden space.
Excellent. I'm also the vice chair of civil rights, and the chair of the committee is Josh Zakem, who does a lot of great work on persons with disabilities. So I want to say thank you to your team for making sure that all our spaces are accessible. So I think this will really help in that regard. Thank you. The Southwest Corridor Poc.
The Southwest Corridor Park had received a Browne Fund grant in the past and came back in for some additional improvements around, they call it a dry fountain. It's really a sculptural fountain. And so it will restore that structure and the paving around it, in addition to some planting work that they also have underway.
And can you tell us specifically where that location is?
It's Durham and St. Botolph Streets.
Okay. The Back Bay. Mm-hmm. That's the Back Bay.
The Back Bay end of the Southwest Corridor.
Okay. The Friends of Haley Field.
This is building on a project that the Boston Parks and Recreation Department recently completed to add a community garden to an unused space at the edge of Healy Field, between the baseball fields and the swimming pool. Mm-hmm. The community garden has been installed, but this will create an ornamental gateway and fence that really gives a sense of location to this brand-new facility in Roslindale.
Okay. The community gardens, what type of food access to the community gardens play in our city? Would you know that answer?
I don't know with any degree of specificity, but certainly there are more than, I believe, 500 community gardeners. Mm-hmm. And the production of locally grown produce is a huge part of that process, really connecting people with the land, with the food process, and with each other.
Yeah, I know the city has a great program on that particular issue, and it's great to see our families going to these community gardens, using this food, and it's very nutritional, and it's a great way for us to learn more about the importance of nutrition, eating well, healthy diet. So I think the mayor's office is doing excellent work on that outreach we have across the city. The Holocaust Memorial Committee.
This, again, was a project that had received Browne Fund funds in the past, as well as support from a whole range of funders. They had some damage a few years ago, and it appeared that one of the landscape elements, which is an area of what they call river stones, which are those glossy stones, those are loose as a design element, and so part of what this project will do is secure those so that they're not potential for throwing them through the panels, which seems to have been what happened. And also some additional paving work and granite work to improve accessibility through the memorial spaces, part of the project.
Okay. That's a special and important memorial in our city. I know the founder of it is Steve Ross, who's a wonderful man, a Holocaust survivor. And that's really a healing memorial that we have, and it's a gem in our city of healing and showing our commitment to that terrible Holocaust. I think it's a beautiful memorial, and it says a lot about our city as well. I'm also proud when my father was mayor, he worked on that committee with Steve Ross, so I think it's one of the most beautiful memorials in our city. And finally, the Mass Fallen Heroes.
Mass Fallen Heroes, part of this project will be to honor one of the founders of the Mass Fallen Heroes Memorial with a glass panel. And also, sadly, we continue to lose people in wars. And so this honors additional people who've sacrificed their lives for their country.
Okay. Just on the last two, the Holocaust Memorial and especially, but maybe the Mass Fallen Heroes also, I do remember when the person that vandalized the Holocaust Memorial throwing some type of object at it. But do we also have glass ready when this unfortunately does happen, that we can replace it right away, or do we have to go through the process of redoing it when something happens, or can we almost like buy in a few of them at a time?
Well, because they're all custom, and you don't know which one might fall victim, the Holocaust Memorial does keep a number of panels at the ready so that they can be replaced very promptly. I don't know if Fallen Heroes has done the same thing, but it's certainly a prudent choice if they can.
Your description of these projects were excellent. I want to say thank you, and with that, I'd like to ask my colleague, Councilor O'Malley, if you have any questions.
I don't. You did a very thorough and exhaustive overview, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you all for your great work. I guess just more procedurally, how much money is endowed in the Browne Fund?
Do we have just north of 14?
Just close to 15.
Close to $15 million.
And is this sort of the ballpark for what the average expenditures are, about 600 and just under 700,000?
So generally the way we do that is that we distribute income on an annual basis, which is all we're allowed to spend.
Yeah.
We distribute
Income. Interest,
right.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That income is calculated as 5% because some years it's going to be higher, some years it's going to be
Sure.
lower. So that generally spins off about $800,000 a year based on the balance. This year we didn't have quite as much. We had plenty of income, but we didn't need it all for the projects, which is actually a good thing because at this point the Browne Fund has approximately 225 projects in the ground. One of the responsibilities that we have also in some cases is ongoing maintenance of
Sure.
a number of those projects. So it's nice that we're able to reserve some money to take care of what we've already funded.
Sure. And do you set the amounts, or does a nonprofit or a Friends of group make a request with a specific amount?
The group makes the request with a specific amount.
Okay. And do you use that as a guideline, or is that like I'm looking at Healy Field is $33,060? Did they ask for that specific amount? Or they did, so it has to be that
In
level
that case,
of
it was very
specificity.
specific, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes what we'll do, especially with the lower dollar figures, that's quite often at the very beginning stages of the process to where they're really looking for design money. The fabrication is really where it gets a little bit more expensive, and so it may be that we'll see higher amounts come in for some of these projects in later years.
That's correct.
So.
And do we have, this may be sort of galaxy brain here, but do we have a memorial thanking Mr. Browne for endowing this incredible legacy? Or do we have a plaque, recognizing what he's done?
We do have a plaque. We have plaques on most, if not all, of the things that are funded through the Browne Fund.
Yeah.
And so those are on 200 and some odd sites throughout the city.
Okay, that's fair. But I'm thinking of him, the White Fund, so many other, great Bostonians who have left such an incredible, rich history. Obviously, we will support all of these incredible projects, and I'm particularly interested to see what happens with the Coconut Grove Memorial. It was, O'Malley family folklore. Both my grandparents were slated to go that night. They were both BC alums, and just so happened that my uncle, their firstborn, who was a baby, was colicky and sick, so that's the only reason why they didn't come. They had a babysitter coming over and everything, and who knows how things would have turned out had they gone there. So, and I feel like every Bostonian has a story like that. So, and not the least of which are the in the aftermath of that tragedy, the incredible fire safety codes that now we see across the country because of that. It's important to remember those. Obviously, the first responders and the fallen heroes, the Holocaust Memorial. I mean, so many great, important things that we should be memorializing in a somber and dignified way that this is going to help us do. So just thank you all for your work, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. I just have two follow-up questions. When the Brown Fund money is sitting in the city coffers, does it collect interest while it's sitting there?
Technically, that money does not accrue interest.
Okay.
Once it's been moved over to the income side of the books, but generally it's spent down fairly quickly. What accrues earnings is the large principal balance
Okay.
that stays invested.
And does the Brown Fund have a group of friends that do any fundraising? Do they have a yearly fundraiser that people might want to give, businesses might want to give, knowing that the Brown Fund donates funds to excellent organizations throughout our city? But is there a role for people to play if they wanted to donate, or especially businesses?
I think there could be. Currently, there's not any type of process for additional fundraising specifically into the Brown Fund bucket. I think what you see in lieu of that is really strong community engagement around each one of these projects, and that's where a lot of the fundraising comes into play.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you for your testimony. At this time, I would like to ask if there's any public testimony, and 3 people did sign in to testify. Kenneth Marshall, Dr. Kenneth Marshall, Michael Hanlon, and Paul Miller. I believe all 3 are with the Coconut Grove Group. If one wants to testify, or if all 3 of you wanted to testify, whatever you'd like to do.
We'll all do it just briefly.
Okay.
I am Ken Marshall, former chief at the Mount Auburn of Plastic Surgery and of the Mass Plastic Surgery Society, and also the New England Society. My personal connection with this is that my mother was a Coconut Grove fire nurse and was there for the 4 days following the tragedy. I'm the only one in this room that remembers the night, but I was 4. I had no idea what was going on, except she didn't come back for 4 days. And so it became family folklore, and it bothered her very much because she had PTSD, which was one of the sequelae of the fire, and she never recovered from it, really. Mike and I, who are friends, we're both Bostonians, and I was born here and came back here after several sojourns in other places, but the thing is that I had never really known specifically where it was. It's one of these things, I used to ask my patients, did they know where it was? And I had Hyde Park and Charlestown and so on as answers. But I myself had been to Mario's restaurant right next door and never realized where I was. And Mike and I went down there 12 years ago, just after the anniversary. And by the way, I want to correct something that's on the public record. The date of the fire is not the 18th of November, it's the 28th of November, just for the record. But in any case, we went down there, and there were about 4 bouquets of flowers that were a week old, and it was cold. And Mike and I reminisced about it. He and I had had a conversation before, and we realized that we were out of the Boston Braves era, which none of the rest of you are. But in any case, I was just struck by the fact it was my first visit there, even though I'd grown up with the whole story. And I later on actually was motivated to become a burn surgeon, and morphed from them into, because of the traumatic sort of business of dealing with burn patients, became a general plastic surgeon instead. But in any case, we noted that there was nothing there. There was no memorial. And the only memorial, there was 1 or 2. There was a plaque in the ground that was fashioned by Tony Mara, who was the youngest busboy in the club the night of the fire. And he became a metalsmith, and it was commissioned by former Mayor Flynn at the time of the 50th anniversary, and Mike had been to that. I had not, of course. And there's also a little plaque from the Boston Historical Society in the back of the garage, but that's it. There was nothing else there. And a former fire commissioner from New York visited Paul Christian, who was our fire commissioner, and just remarked that he could not believe that there was no memorial. And this tragedy, just to give you just a brief, and it's all in the stuff that we passed out, but this was the largest, really, in many ways, the largest disaster that the city ever endured. And we have all the legends about the molasses fire and all these other things, but this thing killed 490 people. And I'm ex-Navy flight surgeon, and it sort of saddens me to know that 51 active duty service personnel were killed in this fire, because Boston was a staging area for World War II, and they were all celebrating. And fortunately, the BC football team lost, and they did not go, although some did and perished. So this was a terrific disaster, and as was mentioned earlier, this is transmitted down the generations, and we're 77 years later, and there is nothing there. And so it just struck me that this was really something that, and this is so historically important, and Paul Miller is going to talk about the fire safety things. I'll just briefly mention there are 5 monumental medical things that came out of this: burn care, pulmonary injury care. The one that staggers everybody is this was the first use in the entire world, civilian world, of penicillin. And penicillin arguably was the sort of medical advance of World War II. Finally, the other two, the first blood bank ever created in a hospital was created at the Mass General because of this fire by Beamy Suter. And then finally, you know, I'm a Vietnam vet, and we always blame the Vietnam War for PTSD, but not so. The very first paper ever written about PTSD was written about this fire. So for me, this is, as you mentioned before, it should be a learning experience, and we hope that the Warwick Station fire won't happen if somebody had read this and saw it in the flesh, and a monument. And as Mayor Flynn pointed out, that's a location that we've sort of arrived at, which is an entrance to the city. People will see it and wonder what it is, and it's not being used in that area very much at all. So we kind of hope that you get approval. We're very happy that so far the Browne Fund seems to be interested in seeding the money for the artists, because that's where we have to go next. But I really appreciate your time, and Paul Miller is going to talk a little bit about the fire safety things. He's a resident of Bay Village, by the way, right next door.
Dr. Marshall, just as you mentioned, I wanted to thank you on behalf of the city for your service the day after Veterans Day in Vietnam, and thank you to the chairman as well for his service with the United States Navy.
Intrepid. When you go to New York, it's a great museum to visit. Take your children and grandchildren.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. I'm Paul Miller. As Doc said, I'm a 22-year resident of Bay Village. I own property in 3 different neighborhoods. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a voter.
Paul, can you talk up, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. And I've lived across the street from the site of the fire for 20 years. And when they decided to build condos there, a lot of us felt that it shouldn't have happened, and that should have been turned into a park. And as Doc said, there's only one small memorial to the fire. And this, we want to thank the City Council, the Browne Fund, the Treasury Department, the Trust Division, and of course the mayor, the mayor's office and his staff for all the support and everything that they're helping us move this forward. As Doc said, there's all these great medical advancements that came out of this fire, this horrible tragedy. But the fire code improvements that were adopted here in Boston and then across the state and then nationally, and a great deal of them form the basis of the International Fire Code. So this tragedy that happened here in Boston, 492 people passed away, 150 of them were Bostonians, saves millions of lives every day, every year around the world. And we need to build this permanent memorial as a tribute to the victims, the survivors, the families, the first responders, and to celebrate these amazing advancements, medical advancements, fire code advancements, and legal advancements that are used every day around the world. And it's in that vein that we feel that this fits perfectly into the Browne Fund's edict. This memorial, when built, will educate, it will be a place of reflection, and it will add a place in the city where the citizens of this great city can come together and learn about the past and hopefully not repeat it in the future. So we thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And with that, there is no other public testimony. I would like to thank the panelists for testifying, for your tremendous support and advocacy of this excellent program. The Browne Fund contributes so much to our city. We want to say thank you personally to you, and we want to say thank you to Mayor Walsh and his staff for their great work and in support of the Browne Fund as well. I want to thank the public that testified here this afternoon, and with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.